It's a big day and welcome to another edition of From Down Under to Down South. I'm your host, Aussie Mike, and today we're going to be delving into the murky waters of immigration in the United States. It's certainly a hot button topic, and especially when we're coming into an election year. It's all the talk here in the US at the moment. We'll look at the reasons why people choose to move here legally, and then we'll also have a look at why people are coming here illegally as well. So is there any indications that illegal immigration is worsening? Where are these people coming from and how are they getting there? All that and more, so stick around. As I'm probably sure that you know by now, this accent is not an American accent. No, in fact, I am an immigrant myself. We moved over here in 2018 after spending probably 10 to 15 years going backwards and forwards to Nashville, Tennessee, and to the United States, and really just fell in love with the country. So why do people immigrate to America? You know, one of the big reasons is that the United States is portrayed as the promised land, where people can come over and seek the American dream. Is the American dream still real? That's something that we can look at another time for sure. They look for a higher standard of living at the end of the day. But also Hollywood has a lot to play as to why people want to move to the United States. It's the Hollywood portrayed life you see on TVs and movies, and the 4 cars in the garage and the swimming pool, and sometimes it's not exactly like that. The lure of America's prestigious universities is another reason. I say prestigious, but I'm a little bit worried about what's been happening in our universities here as of late. So professional opportunities, professional sports, being repatriated with family. There's a lot of different reasons why people are moving here. Now, of all the people that are coming here, 42% of them are actually coming for work. Another 30% are coming here for family reasons, and 23% are actually coming here for school as well. Now, less than 1% are coming on the diversity visa, otherwise known as the green card lottery, which is how we ended up coming here. We ended up winning the green card lottery in 2017 after trying for around 10 years or so. But when you're talking about the green card lottery, it's not as easy as just having a number or your name drawn out of a hat. You then have to go through an interview process, background checks, medical checks, etc., and it also costs you a lot of money too. So not as easy as just winning it like that. A lot of countries are not allowed to participate in the green card lottery as well. So you're looking at countries that have high amounts of immigration to the United States. So India, for example, is one. Mexico, the United Kingdom is another one too. They can't enter the green card lottery. Most immigrants, regardless of where they came from or how long they've been in the United States, say that the reason why they came here was for want of a better life, not only for themselves, but more so for their family and their future generations. And the predominant reasons that people come is because of those educational opportunities. It's for safety, it's for more rights and more freedoms. You'll typically find when you're looking at immigrants that first generation of immigrants might do it a little bit harder. They have to set themselves up in a brand new country. It's about, trying to get jobs. It's about trying to get houses, etc. But then it becomes easier for the next generation. Overall, a majority of immigrants say that their financial situation was vastly improved by moving here. In fact, 80% of people say that. Education, it's 80% as well, an 80% improvement as far as that's concerned. Their employment situation and safety. So as I mentioned, safety is another big reason that people actually move here. 3 in 4 immigrants actually say that if they had the chance to do it again, they would still come to America, which is, it says that things are working out for them, I guess. And then when you're looking at 6 in 10 people say they plan to stay in the United States, but 20% of people are actually thinking of going back home. And hand on heart, that's probably the situation that we're in at the moment. I'd be quite happy, to be honest, to jump on a plane and go back. Maybe that's a little bit of homesickness as well. And I guess if we had the ability to be able to travel backwards and forwards like some people can do, no doubt we would feel 100% differently. Unfortunately, finance is going to get in the way of that one too. It's not exactly easy to fly back and forwards to the other side of the world. So despite an improved situation in their overall lives, and in particular to their country of birth, many immigrants report facing challenges as well. And some of those biggest challenges that immigrants are facing, workplace discrimination is a really big one. Fears that the US immigration laws, now they can be a little bit hard to understand. And I guess this would be the case if you were here illegally. You probably would be pretty scared that ICE would show up on your doorstep and send you back to where you came from. Most immigrants are employed. However, about half of them say that they have faced discrimination in the workplace. Now, for myself, as far as discrimination is concerned, I don't believe I've ever faced that from an employer here, but certainly from clients, it's something that I did experience. And to go back to this, you look at me, I look like I'm an American guy until I open my mouth and I sound like somebody else completely different. And some people get taken aback by that. And one of the first expressions that really drives me crazy is, they kind of screw their news up, like, where are you from? And, give you this really strange looking look. Now, most people are really cool about that. I did have a couple of people, and for want of a better word, I guess we have to call them assholes, that would try and play on the accent and they give it back to you in a really rude and aggressive manner. Now, another one for immigrants is that about a quarter of all immigrants with college degrees say that they are overqualified for the job that they are actually here doing. And I know a lot of cases where you may have a doctor or a nurse from a different country that comes to the US, and because of the different standards of education, they can't get a job in that profession that they may have been doing for years without actually going back to college in order to go and do it. So they end up taking what they can get. I ran into a nurse the other day that was working as a cleaner. Now, she was an emergency room nurse in a country in Africa, very well educated, could not get a job here, had to go back and restudy. So she was doing that. And, all kudos to her for doing it, but it must be extremely frustrating. I found with my role here working for one of the major banks, it was a very different role to what I was doing in Australia. It was a lot less technical, and to be honest, it was boring. It was more like babysitting than anything else. But the type of role that I was doing back home didn't really exist here. It's just not something that we have. So about 40% of immigrants say that they receive worse treatment than people that are born in the US. And there's also a very common one where they are told to go back to where they came from. Now, I know that is something in Australia that I have heard Australians say to immigrants over there. And Australia, can be quite a racist country in that respect. But it's also something that I've heard here as well. Now, again, not so much to me, but having colleagues from, let's say, Egypt as an example, because there's a big Egyptian population here in Nashville. I have heard that quite often. I guess also because they are from the Middle East. There's a little bit of a stigma around that as well. And the stories that I'd heard, particularly around, say, 9/11 and how they were treated, and they were from Egypt. They weren't from Saudi or Afghanistan or, those places that were involved in the Twin Towers attack, but they were still treated like they were. So it was a scary time in America. I understand that, but I also feel for the way that these guys were treated too. They've come to America to really make the best of it, and Egyptian population in Nashville is huge. In fact, it's one of the largest Egyptian populations outside of Egypt, and a big reason for that is the Coptic Church. Immigrants make up more than 16% of the total population of the United States, and most immigrants say that moving to America has provided them with the opportunities that have improved their quality of life, and the majority feel extremely welcome here. And, hand on heart, I actually feel the same way. Probably a couple of the times that I haven't, some friends of ours here that we went around to their place, I think it was for Thanksgiving or for Christmas, one or the other, and we met people outside before we walked in, and their attitude was, oh, so you're the Australians, looking down on our noses. And I said to Bicky, hey, maybe we should just leave. We actually haven't been to any more of their parties or get-togethers because we just felt so uncomfortable by how those people approached us, I guess. And, yeah. Anyway, it is what it is. I heard someone the other day describe being an Australian in America like being a rock star. Everyone thinks that your accent's cool. You come from a place where you've got all of these really weird and wonderful animals that want to kill you. And it's a place that many people say is on their bucket list. I hear that on a daily basis. I guess it also helps that we are English speakers. In fact, the other day I had someone say to me, I bet you get laid a lot with that accent. And yeah, Bicky wasn't too impressed with that one either, but I'm married, lady. But I have had my share of xenophobic interactions and experienced some of what I just mentioned in the workplace. I've been questioned, couldn't they find an American to do your job? On several occasions, I've had to take roles that were certainly below my experience in order to get working here. The vast majority of Americans are fantastic and welcoming, but there is a little bit of a redneck attitude, I guess uneducated, untraveled is probably the word I'm looking for. And I guess I find that a lot in a lot of people in Tennessee that have barely been out of the state, let alone been out of the country. I met someone last week who was so excited just to meet her first Australian, and people that just want to ask you a million questions about what it's like there. And those are the interactions that I absolutely love. And it's, one of the things that I love about being an expat is be able to educate people on the country that you're from. And, at times I actually feel like an Australian tourism ambassador. After this quick break, we'll venture into the world of illegal immigration and how that looks as we head into the federal election in just a few months' time. Stick around. So significantly more Americans name immigration as their number one concern in the US. And in fact, that number is now up to 28% of Americans say immigration is their number one concern. It actually is in front of the economy. The economy scored only 12% and inflation at 11%. So this time last year, the government was the number one problem that Americans felt as far as overall society is concerned. Immigration has now passed that. And it is the number one issue that Americans see, particularly coming into the election. Unifying the country only comes in at 4%. So all of this crap that we hear about Republicans and Democrats and left and right and everybody fighting and nobody wanting to get together and just make America the great country that it used to be and it still can, only comes in at 4%. And then crime, this one surprised me as well, because particularly here in Nashville, when we've got crime levels that are starting to rise as our population comes along, crime only comes in at 3%. And you know what else comes in at 3%? Healthcare. Now, if you've listened to the podcast, you know that I am very passionate as far as the healthcare system in the United States is concerned, and that we need to be able to do better for our people. The last time that immigration was the primary concern of the nation was 5 years ago, when there was a surge of Central American migrants attempting to cross the border. In recent months, there has been record numbers of illegal immigrants coming across, with some 300,000 people coming across every month. So these vast numbers of people are putting a huge strain on social services, particularly in those border areas, such as Texas. A separate question in that survey found that a record high number, in fact 55% of adults, say that large numbers of immigrants entering the United States illegally is a critical threat to the US vital interests. The previous time that this was above 50% was 20 years ago during the Bush administration. The vast majority of Republicans already believed illegal immigration was a critical threat, and said 84% said so a year ago. That number has now increased up to 90%. But the Democrats as well have also increased. So last year they were at 20%. Now they're almost at 30%. Kind of tells you that there is something going wrong with this illegal immigration, and people are concerned about it. Illegal immigration has certainly increased substantially under the Biden administration. The Department of Homeland Security lists that number as 2.5 million people having been released into the US and 2.8 million people having been removed or expelled. So you're talking about 5.3 million illegals coming across the border since the Biden administration has been in power. And 2.5 million of those people have actually been let into the country. That number is vastly different, though, from the numbers that politicians like to throw around. So Republican candidate for president Nikki Haley, for example, she was quoted saying that there are over 8 million people here illegally during Biden's term. So you're a little bit off on that one, Nikki, although I do appreciate the sentiment on that. 27% of people attempting to cross illegally turn around and try again. It's called recidivism, and that's up from only 7% trying again in 2019. That tells me, America, that you have a little bit of a problem as far as the border is concerned, because people are not taking border security seriously. 27% of people are turning around, coming back, and trying again. Data on illegal crossings does take a long time to come through, partly due to how long it takes for the authorities to sort through and classify the cases. But from the month after Biden took office to October of last year, there were 6.5 million encounters at the US-Mexico border. 2.5 million people have been released into the United States with notices to appear in immigration court or report to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, otherwise known as ICE, or other classifications such as parole. There are also estimates that an additional 1.6 million people have managed to actually escape detection and cross over the border illegally during that time. So what happens to migrants who arrive at the southern border without authorization to enter the US. Let's have a look at what actually happens to them. Typically, migrants will go into US territory and they'll wait to be apprehended. It's actually better for them just to try and get caught, with the intention of asking for asylum. Now, that's what it's all about. Let's cross the border, sit, wait until you get caught, and then we're going to ask for asylum. They're taken to a processing center, and it's typically like a large tent city, 24 to 72 hours to go and answer questions, go and give their biometric information. And essentially what the government is doing at this time is checking to see whether or not they're on the terrorism watch list. That's the biggest concern that they have. Now, while they are in custody, they're processed and they're given the appropriate dispositions about what's actually going on. They could be released with a notice to appear. They could be kicked out. And they're also asked if they want to return to Mexico, because that's where they're actually coming from. Now, for an expedited removal, America would have to have a relationship with that migrant's country of origin, and they would have to have space on a repatriation flight as well. Now, ICE would also need the capacity to hold the migrants pending removal. So when you're looking at 300,000 people coming across the border every month, the space to actually put them somewhere also becomes a bit of a problem. Now, in 2023, 46% of encounters were migrants from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and countries that regularly accept repatriation of their citizens. So sending people back wasn't so much of a problem. Venezuelans made up 10% of encounters. The US announced in October that Venezuela has actually agreed to start sending people back, but in January of this year, Venezuela halted those flights. So you could be catching Venezuelans at the border, but they can't be sent back because Venezuela doesn't want to accept them. For families, Border Patrol doesn't want to keep children in custody for very long. So they're likely to be released into the community with a notice to appear to immigration court. Whether they come back or not is another story too. So let's say that those that are released into the US are generally saying that they have a fear of returning home to their country. That's why they're wanting asylum. If they're saying that, they're generally going to be released back into the community, because the capacity that Border Patrol and ICE have just can't keep up with it. So people that are presenting a national security threat, they are the ones that are prioritized for being held in detention and then sent back. It's the families, it's the ones that are not seen as a threat that are generally released into the community. There's also a humanitarian program, and it's particularly for people that are from Cuba, Haiti, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. Now, with that program, if they have someone that can sponsor them, they can actually stay in the United States for up to 2 years. And through the end of last year, there's been 327,000 people that have been granted parole under that program. And it launched in 2022 for Venezuelans, and then it was expanded to those other countries as well. Currently, there's around 30,000 slots available for that one. That's a lot of immigrants. 30,000 people a month just under that one scheme. As far as children is concerned, and there was a lot of talk about children in custody, particularly during the last election between Trump and Biden. Unaccompanied children are transferred to the Department of Health and Human Services, which is responsible for children who cross the border on their own. Those seeking asylum must prove that they meet the definition of a refugee. So there is a fact sheet out there that actually explains what the definition of a refugee is. So in order to be granted asylum, an individual is required to provide evidence demonstrating either that they have suffered persecution on account of a protected ground in the past, and or that they have a well-founded fear that if they go back, they will receive persecution in their home country. Because there's such a large backlog of these cases, asylum seekers can spend years waiting for a court date. So less than 15% of those asylum seekers were actually granted it in 22 and 23. Less than 15%. But it's taking 4 or 5 years for asylum seekers to actually get to court. So you can see how this huge backlog of cases is coming up. 300,000 people a month, only 15% are meeting the asylum seeker guidelines. The rest are going back, but in the meantime, they're all sitting here in the country and they're all escaping and they're all just out and about running amok. Yeah, sounds good. The immigration court backlog was 3 million cases in November. It's going to take a hell of a long time to try and get through 3 million cases. That's a record number of cases, by the way. The raw numbers are actually much higher under the Biden administration. 5 million encounters under the Biden administration compared to 1.4 million under the Trump administration during the same time period. Tells me we've got a little bit of a problem there. In 2023, authorities seized over 27,000 pounds of fentanyl. 27,000 pounds is enough to kill more than 6 billion people. Goodbye planet if we let all of that go through. In fact, just this week, 11,000 pounds of methamphetamine was found on the San Diego border crossing. And the amount of meth that's been stopped this year at that one border crossing is now closing in on 100,000 pounds. Last year, there were 169 individuals that were on the terrorist watch list, and they were stopped entering the US-Mexico border. They're the ones that were stopped. So how many are getting through that aren't being stopped? That's my question as well. Before the pandemic, roughly 9 in 10 migrants crossing the border came from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, which are the 4 countries that are closest to the US border. However, those countries no longer hold the majority. In fact, as of 2023, half of all illegal immigrants coming across the border are from the rest of the world. The greatest number have come from countries that are farther away from America. This is another one that I don't understand. So if you're seeking asylum in another country, why are you flying to the other side of the world to get asylum? In 2019, for example, the number of Colombians apprehended illegally crossing the border was 400 people. In 2023, there was 154,000 people from Colombia, from 400 to 154,000 in the space of 4 years. A little bit of an increase there. But it's not only the Americas that these people are coming from. In fact, Africa, Eastern Europe, and every region in Asia. There have been dramatic increases in the number of migrants from the world's most populous countries. So between 2019 and 2023, the number of migrants from China and India grew more than 11-fold and 5-fold respectively. Some countries that previously sent negligible numbers of migrants to the US have seen staggering increases. And so we're going to have a look at some of those numbers. In 2019, as an example, the African country of Mauritania, there were 20 people that were stopped in that year. 4 years later, that number went to 15,260. All of a sudden, everyone in Mauritania wants to come across to the US. From Turkey, that number went from 60 to over 15,000 people. The list goes on. More than 50 nationalities saw apprehensions multiplied by 100 times or more. And a major factor in this change is the massive expansion of transcontinental smuggling networks. And all of that is helped along by digital technology and social media. So Jacumba Hot Springs, it's a small town in California, and it's on the American side of the US-Mexican border. It's around an hour and a half drive from San Diego. It's kind of out there in a very mountainous and rocky area. It has border fences, it has razor wire, etc. And back of March of this year, there was a group of around 30 migrants from China, and they were headed through the fence and into the United States. Among them, there was a middle-aged man who was from Tianjin in China, and he traveled with his 14-year-old son. He said the economic damage in China that was brought about by COVID, coronavirus, etc., and all of the shutdowns made it so economically hard for them that they had to escape China. Also, they were leaving because of China's strict policies, etc., etc. So they took off for America. Now, how did they get to the US-Mexican border? They got there via Ecuador. Ecuador is one of the few countries around the world where Chinese citizens do not need visas to enter. So you jump on a plane, you fly to Ecuador. From there, they basically move north. So the trip gets arranged by Chinese smugglers, and these smugglers are known as snakeheads. Really nice name. Now, this guy, he never saw the snakeheads, and he really didn't know anything about them, but he was communicating with them through WeChat and other forms of social media as well. The smuggler's services cost him around $10,000 per person, and in return, he received precise information of where to go, who to meet, and all these different contacts along the way. All of these people, part of international crime gangs. Ecuadorians, Colombians, Mexicans, etc., all working together to go and ship this traffic. This is human trafficking. It's happening here every single day. The journey was not easy. Somewhere in Colombia, the first snakehead stopped responding to his messages, scamming him out of thousands and thousands of dollars, leaving him and his son stranded until they came across another Chinese migrant on the same trail. While they were in a small boat circumventing a portion of the Darien Gap, which is in between Colombia and Panama, they watched as another boat full of migrants capsized and those migrants drowned. China offers one of the largest examples of this new era of global migration. Between 2014 and 2022, the average number of Chinese citizens who crossed the southern border without papers in a given year was around 1,400 people. Fast forward to 2023, that number has now grown to 24,000 people. Experts and law enforcement officials describe these networks as loosely being connected, and at certain key points, they are controlled by the most powerful criminal organizations in the Americas. The Colombian side of the Darien Gap was recently taken over by the Gulf Clan, for example. And these guys are a violent narco-paramilitary cartel widely thought to be one of the largest cocaine exporters in the world. As a result, the Darien jungle, which was once extremely impassable, is now a route for mass migration. They've actually gone out, cleared out the jungle, made pathways for these people to be traversed through. That's how much money this is worth to these guys. The opening up of the stretch of jungle alone accounts for some of these sharp arrivals. It's just so much easier to get to America now. It was this vast global network of interlocking smugglers that moved the Chinese immigrant and his son along their way to the US. They eventually made their way to Tapachula, which is in southernmost Mexico. And then from there, they caught a flight and made their way to Tijuana, just on the other side of the US-Mexican border. From there, they were once again in the hands of these large criminal organizations. According to US officials, the smuggling business on the south side of the border is typically dominated by the Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation cartels. Along with a larger group of around 30 Chinese migrants, these guys spent the night on the run in safe houses minutes away from the border. The next day, the smugglers piled them into a van. They drove them across, pointed to a spot, basically a gap in the fence, and told them to walk across. The existing US system for handling illegal immigration is geared towards Mexico, and it's geared towards single adults as well. So they already have the systems in place to be able to repatriate a lot of these people. But when you're starting to look at China and other countries that are bringing people in, they don't have the networks in order to be able to send them back, or these countries don't want to take them back. So to manage this, they really need the cooperation of the countries where the people are coming from. Nicaragua, for example, this is another one. So Nicaragua allows visa-free travel from more than 24 African countries and several from Asia as well, also from Cuba. It's a major point of arrival as far as immigrants coming to try and get into America illegally. Go to Nicaragua first. Up until 2012, Mexico accounted for over 85% of migrants apprehended at the border. That number is now down to 20%. Cuba, on the other hand, has seen their number of illegal immigrants increase by 400%. And a large part of that is because Nicaragua is helping them out. Colombian migrants have increased by over 2,000%, Peru by 1,400%, and Russia. Russia goes and invades Ukraine, wants their people to go and fight for them. Well, Russian illegal migrants have increased by over 400%. India by over 600%, and Turkey by almost 1,000%. China by over 400%. Explain to me why a migrant in China, which is away on the other side of the Pacific, and you've got a lot of other countries in Southeast Asia that you could go to, fearing for their life, flies to Ecuador, makes their way all the way up into the United States. Something to that does not add up to me. There is currently an estimated 11.5 million illegal immigrants in the United States. So put that into perspective, the entire state of Tennessee has a population of 7 million people. I'm Aussie Mike. Thanks for joining us today on our first video podcast. If you liked what you heard, you can go and check out all of the other 26, 27 other podcasts on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. But, thanks for joining us. Immigration. Love to hear from you in the chat. Like and subscribe. If you didn't like it, tell me where to go. More than happy with that one too. Stay safe, whatever you're doing, and thanks for joining us on From Down Under to Down South.